Lela, welcome to the show. Thank you for coming on here today.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. Now, I'm interested in this conversation because I have a big background when it comes to sales and I love processes. And a big thing about specifically what you do at Kapal Consulting is go to market strategies, sales optimizations, and partnerships. So for myself, I've dabbled in all three. I know that's like your bread and butter, but I feel like today's age where a lot of entrepreneurs and people are trying to build new opportunities, I feel like this conversation might be one that's very important for people to listen to. So I look forward to seeing how you do what you do, how you got to where you currently are, and then being able to unravel hopefully some of the things you do on the consultancy side, if that's fair.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Okay, awesome. So now I know you work with a lot of major companies, you work with a lot of major clientele as well. Give us a little bit of understanding specifically of like who you are, what's your background, and what is this Kopal Consulting all about?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been in the technology space for the last 10 years. So kind of, I guess, almost 11 years now. So it's really all that I've done. And I started out working at a couple different channel resellers and landed at a Salesforce partner. We had both a product and we did services work. So implementing the software. That led me to working at Salesforce, where I ended up on the partner team. And that right around 2018 is when I started to see a pretty big shift in the level of support that partners got. Previously, partners would get a named partner account manager and a high level of support from the parent company, you could say. So these are companies that have built an entire business around certain ecosystems, Salesforce, SAP, Oracle, and they need that support from Salesforce because they can't really sell directly to customers effectively without either Salesforce's buy-in or the introduction, especially considering the Salesforce employee is generally making that recommendation to the end user about what product or implementation partner they should have in their environment. And that led me, after a round of layoffs in 2020, to try my hand at becoming an entrepreneur, helping partners get guided through the partner process. Now, that was not this company. I did end up like just reading the LLC, but that was not this company. So I ended up getting a little bit more experience and sharpening my skill set. I went to Accenture, which is a major implementation partner, and I was pretty technical there. I was a solution architect. Decided within a year I wanted to be on the partnership and go to market side. Left and went to a couple boutique partners where I owned the Salesforce partnership and practice, really making sure that I was focused on how we drive revenue through that partner channel. And I decided I would rather, I'm going to be very blunt. I didn't like working for people that
Please.
I felt weren't very transparent in what their goals were. And they hired me to come in as a leader, as a director level, and make these decisions. But ultimately, they weren't listening to me, and I didn't feel I was as effective as I wanted to be. And I wanted to be able to help smaller companies on a more strategic and tactical level. It was just going to be more impactful. So 6 months ago, I restarted Koopal Consulting, but I did it this time with more experience, a little bit more dirt on my shoulder, I guess, and more refined strategy about how I was going to approach it. So my specialization now is working with business to business technology companies that are under 100 million in revenue, drive more revenue
Mm.
basically, and do it in a responsible, thoughtful, scalable way. And I do that through three main ways, as you mentioned earlier: refining their go to market focus and strategy. That's going to be how they market their product or service, who they partner with, who their ideal customer profile is, what their unique value proposition is, which industry events they should attend, et cetera, through revamping their sales process. I call that sales optimization. And then the final piece is bringing it all together, and that is partner strategies and management. So either building out their partner ecosystem or helping them partner better with a Salesforce or SAP to drive what should be that industry benchmark of a minimum of 75% of their business through that partner channel.
First of all, I love that. Second of all, my hat goes off to you to trying again or like, going again. Because a lot of entrepreneurs, when they first get started, and this is even speaking as myself, first get started, that first I won't call it an L, but that first trial period is definitely interesting. So it does a little humbling at times. It's like, okay. But the fact that you said, hey, I'm going to do this again, I feel like people who are truly meant for it will come back around and they'll keep coming to like this want to create something for themselves that most people probably wouldn't if they were just thrown in. So the fact that you've been able to do that and you're here now again to recreate this opportunity, my flowers goes to you. So
I appreciate that because I've come to the conclusion that I have to make this work because until I feel like my business model is a complete L and I don't have another idea up my sleeve, or I hate being an entrepreneur, I'm unemployable.
I completely understand that. Thankfully, I can always rely back on my sales skills. So if we ever need to get an
Yeah.
opportunity, that's a great thing. But it's interesting because a lot of people I speak to, and one of my I call him like a mentor, a person I look up to, Dwayne Johnson. He talks about the concept of basically having his back against the wall, right? And then you like have no other choice but to go forward. And I feel like oftentimes you have to put yourself in that position to like, hey, there's no other options. I'm burning the boats. I'm going to make this work, whether it's this one, it's the reiteration of it, or so forth. We're going to exhaust everything that we can to the last moment. And then eventually it's like, okay. But I feel like over time, as you're learning and you're growing, new insights come in and other potential businesses come out, it then like gives you new creatives. So it's hard to say that you'll ever stop unless your willpower just decides to stop out and like passion for it.
That's really it. And that's why I say I'm unemployable. I mean, I know how to contribute to a business. I wouldn't come in as an individual contributor. So it's not like I would walk in and just be this terrible employee that doesn't take direction. But ultimately, I would be an employee that would trip within a couple of years
Yeah.
because I would look at employment as a means to an end to rebuild my bank account to try this again.
I am the same way. I was trying to figure that out like couple years ago. I was like, why do I keep getting into this circle? And people like, things are going good. Like, you're moving up, all XYZ. Like, you're making a
Yeah.
lot of money. I was like, yeah, I only did that so then I can go back into to doing this.
Dream die, whether that's because you decide you hate it or because you've ran out of ideas.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's like, good luck keeping me because I'm not really interested at this point in helping a $10 billion company make more money,
Yeah.
unless it's on a short-term basis and I'm a consultant.
Correct. I think honestly, I think that's the part when someone broke it down to me. There was a book I read where I think it's The $1 Million Consultant by Alan Weiss. I'm probably butchering his name. But that opened my eye because I felt literally the same way to where it's like, hey, I don't mind helping you build your company and building this big old conglomerate, but not in the way you want me to. Like, I would love to be a part of it, but in my own way. And then, like, the idea of consulting and coaching kind of came about. But you said something as well, too, that I would love to dive into, which I think we might do a little bit later. But you're in tech, you don't develop software, but you're an integrator. And there's a lot of conversation going on right now for people, especially with like different no code tools and stuff, to where it's like, hey, you don't have to be the engineer, you don't have to be the technician, but you can be the implementer and the integrator to then making sure, these people perform properly. So I think that's fascinating, and I would love to kind of harp on that a little bit. But you work with all these different people in these different companies. Your excitement level, is it more towards like the small, medium size, or those big clientele?
Yeah, and I just want to do a quick differentiate or a quick clarification. I myself am not a system integrator. I have worked at them and my clients are system integrators, but I myself I'm not touching any of the technologies, but I can share some of the strategies obviously. But I prefer those mid-sized companies. I think when you are talking about a company in that 10 to $50 million range in revenue, they have smaller, more dynamic teams, so generally under 500 employees, and they can make decisions and pivot quicker. When you have these massive legacy companies, and I've worked in the enterprise space before, they're really slow to make any sort of decision. Any decision or any change is going to be pretty small. Change management for a multi-thousand person company or even like a 100,000 person company or even a 50,000 person company, it takes a lot of time because it has to reach a lot of levels and you have to roll it out slowly. So I prefer the more dynamic companies that can have massive change, that can implement it really quickly.
Yeah, I'm happy that you shared that because it's funny because some people might hear, I guess anything underneath 10 million to be like, that doesn't sound like a small company, but when you look at the bigger picture and you're actually in it, it's like, no, it is a pretty small.
Right.
But
And realistically, companies making 5 million in revenue, because my bottom pricing is 50,000. They
yeah,
can't afford, they're not spending that kind of money on me.
that's like half. I don't even, that will not bankrupt them, but definitely not put them in a comfortable position.
Yeah, I mean, the CEO is probably taking home a smaller salary than what I would be as a full-time employee. So I'm not going to
Correct.
ask them to spend that money.
But you mentioned that, and what I liked and what I found, there are people who like the zero to the ones, right? Like helping people from bottom up. But then that sweet spot of 1 to 2 is pretty nice. And that's what you just harped on. And that's something I've had to learn over time. And now I've transitioned over to where it's like, I don't really want to work with someone who's bootstrapping, coming right off the ground. It's like we need something kind of already in place. And then we can fine tune and then scale from there. But speaking of the strategies, you have this KGAM, framework, and I love frameworks. I love systems. Help us understand, what does that mean? What is the Koopal growth alignment methodology?
So it's kind of like a double naming convention. Kupal Growth Alignment Methodology. It also stands for Knowledge Growth Assessment and Measurable Activities. It is the methodology that I drive my business with. Having been in this industry for a while, I'm not remaking the wheel by any means. I actually had a call with a prospect who was like, when I was breaking down what I do, they're like, well, that's what we do. And I was like, that means you're doing it right. If I came up with something completely unknown to you, you should be skeptical. You're very successful in the market that you're in. You just need help breaking into this new market with someone who has relationships and is in that time zone, but it should be essentially a replica of what you did to be successful there. So, the Kupal Growth Alignment Methodology, it's a mixture of both the McKinsey 7S internal assessment, which is focusing on the internal readiness for change, and external branding, which I use as the BRIC framework as the basis, which stands for branding, revenue, IP, content or collateral, and knowledge. So when I say the KGAM stands for knowledge growth, assessment, and measurable activities, it is the 4-step process that we use to dive into any business and implement any sort of strategy. We first understand, what existing knowledge do you have? Have you worked with specific technologies, specific industries, segments you have that nobody else has? Then we move on to that next stage, which is growth goals. Where do you want to be in 12, 24, 36, and 60 months? How do we get you there? And then we move into that next stage, an assessment of your current capability. What certifications do you have? What does your staff look like? What case studies do you have today? What does your content, collateral, IP look like? What POVs, white papers do you have? How can we work with that? And then that last one, measurable activities that drive success, is really filling the gap between where you are and where you want to be.
I like that a lot. And it's funny, I didn't coin this, I just love this phrase where it's called knowledge broker.
Yeah.
And I feel like you literally just embodied that. And I tell a lot of people, typically consultants or just people in this field, that's what you are, right? There's nothing quote unquote new underneath the sun. There's a lot of ingredients, but everybody creates their recipe a little bit differently, right?
Yep.
With that being said, it's like, hey, there's tools, there's information, there's resources out there. As you mentioned, it's like, I'm not doing anything crazy or new, but maybe how I go about it, the process in it in itself is what's going to help you to accomplish it. I had a similar conversation yesterday, and I have a follow up, funny enough, this evening with a potential client. And that's the conversation me and him are having right now. I'm like, hey, guy, I'm not saying that you couldn't do it, because there are certain things you're doing now, which we would quote unquote replicate. I'm just going to do it a lot more efficient than you are doing. And is that
Yeah.
worth it for you? Ultimately, at the end of the
Absolutely.
day.
That's really what it is. So many times over is you have a company that stumbles into success And then they get really excited and they have these crazy goals for the next year because they had a $20 million deal, but they don't know how they got that $20 million deal. And they have like a $40 million year, and then they have a $20 million year, and then they have to do layoffs because they, grew their headcount according to what their growth goals were, which was all hinged on this one deal. I want to help companies avoid doing that. So how do you create sustainable, responsible, predictable growth in your company? And that is by following a framework, following a methodology. And that's also where I think I differentiate myself from other consultants in this field, because there's no shortage of people that are doing this. But one of my partners that I do business with today made a really great quote. And she said, if there's no competition, you don't have a market. So
Yeah.
I always
Uh,
embrace competition and collaboration. It's good to see what happens, and then at the end of the day, when all is said and done, whether we won or lost, we shake each other's hands and we share a drink and we share strategies. How did you do
correct.
this? Why you shouldn't do that? But I see a lot of folks that don't have this methodology. And one thing I wanted to do is I wanted to build a business that could scale. I want to sell my business in 5 years, and I can't do that if all of my business is dependent on me, Lela Koopal, as the consultant. I can only grow so much. So I wanted to create this framework so that my prospects and my clients understood that what I was building extended beyond me. Whether it's me or a consultant that's on this project working with you, you're getting the same level of information and value.
I like that. Yeah, that was the one thing that I noticed and really stood out, because you have the opportunity, if people want to leverage these frameworks and work with you in that kind of collaborative effort, you have it. And most people aren't like that. They're like, hey, I want to hide all these things, which I'm not saying is necessarily bad, but I enjoy that aspect as well, of understanding how can you help one another sharpen iron. There's so many different clienteles out there. More than likely, we're not even in the same market. So what are those different strategies? Like, how can you go back and forth, and or because there's a lady, funny enough, there's a lady I did a podcast with, and we're currently in conversation right now about collaboration, because she takes care of one aspect that I wouldn't for my clients, and I take care of the other aspect that they would want to afterwards. So we're like, okay, there's actually a potential partnership here, and this is interesting. So
Yeah.
I
No,
like those moments.
absolutely. I'm always a big fan of cooperation over competition, and we'll see what happens when we're there, right? But I partner with folks that have very competitive services to me, but it's a little bit different, right? So one guy does strategic advisory work, but he doesn't actually do the fractional tactical work that I do. He'll meet with a client and he'll recommend that they hire me to do something. And I recommend that they hire him for certain things or ongoing advisory work. And then another person, she does very similar to what I do, but she works with a different segment. Now, it's not a segment that I don't touch on, but we're doing this thought series together, and we're bringing together a small focus group over a series of 10 weeks, culminating in an in-person workshop to help them with very specific strategies. On system integrators, she's focused on ISVs, independent software vendors in the space. Technically, each of us would work with each other's, but we're staying in our lanes and pitching ourselves as, A or B. That being said, if one of the SIs wanted to go call her and work with her on something, I welcome it. And same with if one of the ISVs called me to work on something.
I like that. It's funny because I think some people, they're hearing this and they're like, I hear you, but like, how do you then combat or have the conversation to where it's like, because most people, they would just be like, hey, let's just all form one company then. How do you still keep that individuality and separateness versus just having that? And maybe that might happen down the road to where you just bring it all in house. And
Yeah.
it's this big, big organization, right?
We talked about that too, because
Okay.
both of we have the goal of acquisition. And so it's like, let's see where companies end up when it comes to time to valuation and see where we fall. And if we can double or triple what that valuation looks like, or get a better multiplier, if we come together as one, that is something we're open to. But for now, we have different ways of operating, even though they're very complementary. So it's pretty easy to just come together for some campaigns on certain things and not, do the day to day together.
Now, did you have this same mindset and thought process the first go around as well? Or was this like during your second time, you're like, okay, let's do more collaborative work? Because I feel like most people, when they first get started, like, I'll figure it out. I don't know how to maybe do this, or maybe I'm not the best at it, but this client is asking me, I'm gonna
Yeah.
do it. Like,
Interesting. My business model was a little different before. So I was also open to doing small scale implementation and product development outsourcing. I do have a more technical background. So for that type of the business, I actually partnered with companies that were a lot larger than me, and they had a bottom on what they would touch. So we had an agreement where if something was too small for them, they would punt it over to me. And if something was too large for me, I'd either bring it to them and get a referral fee, or what I would do is function as the solution or technical architect on the project as a contractor.
I like that. I'm currently having a conversation with somebody in that same boat, so I might need to actually pick your brain on how you went about that.
A good MSA NDA is key. How do we work together? I always recommend that early on. You have those difficult conversations, you get lawyers involved, you let them duke it out, because that way you're in the clear when you start working. You don't want to have questions pop up when you're in the middle of an engagement and you're trying to figure out who gets paid for what.
Yeah, literally, because we were talking, and thankfully I lived in Vegas for quite some time. A lot of different connections, a lot of different people. I'm actually headed there not too in like 2 weeks. And like if my weight load I can't take it, or there's a client that's too big, I'm like, hey, you have longer time in the game. You've dealt with other clients. Let's figure something out. Even if it's a referral, or maybe somehow like working side by side to where I do a little bit. Don't care. So I'm interested to see how that conversation goes. And it's nice to hear from you that that's a thing, right? Because I think people, if they're just getting started, or maybe they're feeling a little bit overwhelmed in this consultancy space, regardless of the niche or industry, they're like, how do I even do that? Like, would somebody even be open to that? So hearing that is very reassuring for people. Now, talking a little bit about the framework, there's different components. Which part of the framework do you feel like most companies typically have the biggest problem in, or like the key areas? Is it like the go to market? Is it the sales optimization? Or is it like the actual partnership? Yeah.
So I think it depends on what stage they're at. I meet a lot of companies who want a partner management contract, but they need help with their go to market. They just haven't defined what their unique value prop is, who their ideal customer is, what their differentiator is to even get to that point. Because partnership is really about, this is what I add, this is how I add value, this is how you add value, this is how we add value together. I mean, that's why we call marriage partnership too, right? The sum
Yes.
of both is greater than the sum of either. So I think if you don't know how you add value, you can't articulate that effectively in a way that is unique to your business, then you're not ready for that partnership motion yet. So, one thing I actually started incorporating is I do my assessment of your company, and that helps me determine how do you have an appetite for change internally? How does your company digest this? And what do you look like? So I do a miniature KGAM assessment on your knowledge and existing capabilities before I agree to a full engagement, and it's paid, because at the end of that 2 weeks, if I don't think you're a good potential client, or you're not cooperative, or you don't like how I work, because I have very defined timelines on things, and you will have homework. I don't come in and fix problems. You have to work with
I'm
me
so
on
happy
it.
you said that.
Yeah. If you don't like that, you can tell me to F off, and it's $5,000 and that's it. But if you want to move forward, it gets credited to the cost of your engagement, obviously. And it also helps me determine, like, what do you need? Because they go in order, right? You first have to know what your go to market strategy is. And then you have to get your sales process down. And then once you have those two pieces, now we can jump into bringing a partner in and working with that partner. Again, it really depends on where they're at in that stage. But I would say in that 0 to 50 employee mark, or that, 0 to 10 million, that go to market strategy is what people struggle with until they hit that milestone. And I think they can pay themselves like a decent salary, they're growing, and they're getting some ARR, or annual recurring revenue. They're just trying to win business, and they get a little desperate because it
Yeah.
takes a while.
There's a great book that I'm actually reading right now and finishing. It's called Ready, Aim, or Ready, Fire, Aim. And to a degree, that's like the concepts you're talking about. And it breaks down for the different companies and revenue, depending on where they are, what they actually need to do. Now, for your process, I love it because, and I just love consulting because it reminds me of being like at a doctor, which is not saying I love being at a doctor, but it's the concept of like, hey, I'm not going to diagnose what you're telling me the pain problem is. Like, we're going to actually figure out potentially what it is. So I'm pretty sure you can tell when someone tells you like, hey, we're looking for this kind of partner or want to do this, just by how they're explaining it to you. It's like, you probably don't even have a solid go to market. Like, dude, let's backtrack a little bit.
It's always the ones who have a solid go-to-market and need partnership help that are like, maybe you could look at my go-to-market strategy. And I'm like, no, you know exactly what you're doing in that regard. You
Mm-hmm.
just need to increase your pipeline.
Fair enough. What would you say is like the most common mistakes then for people when their go to market strategy? Is it just not
They
really
try to
understanding
be,
their offer?
yeah, they try to be everything to everyone. They try to cast a wider net instead of a more narrow one. So it's always more important to be a mile deep than it is to be a mile wide, which means specialization matters. Customers trust businesses who have spent time understanding their industry and their business problem. So if you're under 200 employees, pick two or three anchor industries that operate similarly to one another and aligning technologies and focus on solving those problems. You've been able to saturate that market. That's when you can expand into something else that's similar. But if I do, let's say I do a regulated industry like life sciences, we'll talk about clinical trial management for an example. It would make sense for me to work with providers or payers or another regulated industry or even like discrete processing for manufacturing. But if I'm like, yeah, I'm going to go from this regulated industry that's highly specialized, and then I'm going to talk about like retail. They don't make sense in how, like, they fundamentally don't align in how they do business. So
Gotcha.
I'm going to question you. And then if I look and I'm like, oh, okay, you have someone on board and you recently switched to these focuses and you have people that spent, 25 years at Genentech, which is, a medication company or
Mm-hmm.
pharmaceutical company. And then you had someone with 15 years of experience working retail at Nordstrom's, then I understand. And they head up these divisions. Then I understand it a little bit more. But then I also question, like, what was your hiring strategy?
Yeah.
What did you do?
You just start to pull back the layers, and it's like, okay, something's up with you. That's the end of
Yeah,
it.
that's where it comes in. Like when you're figuring out what you want to focus on, like first assess what you've already done and what you
Mm-hmm.
already know. If I were to start a business tomorrow in manufacturing, it wouldn't make any sense. There would be such a big gap to fill in understanding of how that business operates, right? That's why I moved into the technology space. I already know it. I already tell people like, because my friend keeps trying to get me into renewables and oil and gas, because that's
A
her.
bad market.
It's Houston, so it makes sense. But I'm like, I don't know their problems. I can't help them.
Yeah.
And I had to turn down a potential client for their state and local government. They needed a business process revamp. But I don't understand what regulations I have to fall within when doing this business process to be able to help them. I would need more hand holding than somebody who is very familiar with that space.
But in those kind of moments, right? And I know commonly people tell you like, hey, when you're first getting started, take any and everything possible just to accumulate
Totally
client.
agree with that.
So that's what I'm hearing. I'm like, okay, this is going to be interesting then, because I understand both sides, but I do say, hey, if you do have a specialty, you have something you're very knowledgeable in, like focus just on that. Not to say like, hey, if you're desperately needing something and it comes about, different conversation. But if you're not like in a very, very tight knit, like stay in the particular specialization you have. But in those kind of moments, and I know you say go narrow, then adjust accordingly. Would it be necessary? Do you see it as a hindrance if those opportunities present someone who's in that new stage or intermediate stage of their consultancy to potentially take on that client that doesn't fit their criteria just to like keep cash in, or do you feel like it's just going to like throw the business off?
I think it's a risk because you don't know how to service that client well. And you're risking your business brand at the early stages when every customer matters. No one's going to get fired for hiring an Accenture or McKinsey, but they could get fired for hiring Koopal Consulting. And so if I come in and I'm charging these prices and I don't deliver, that is a huge risk to my business reputation and to the person who hired me in. And I'd rather not do that. I will say, because I'm 6 months in and I want to make money, you know. I'm so thankful that I have a very supportive partner, but I don't like asking for money. I like having my own. So I've thought about that too, because my offerings are very specific. So how can I expand on that to increase cash flow in slow times while not diminishing my business brand? And so what I have landed on is there are going to be certain things that I'll be willing to tweak in a call if the pricing shocks them. But what I do as an individual to get additional money is going to be separate from what my brand does.
Hmm.
So
If you don't mind me asking, what does that mean? Because
yeah,
I think of it in two different ways to where it's like, because everybody's talking about right now, like personal brand and then like your business brand. How do you separate, or maybe they're both, making money on both sides? Are you trying to set like separating the personal and then the business, or what does that mean?
yeah, separating the personal and the
Okay.
business. So Lela Koopal may take on an advisory role that pays $5,000 a month for a company that's outside of my ideal customer profile, but Koopal Consulting will not.
I think for some people they feel like it might be too hard because the concept of you are the business, right? It's like,
Yeah.
yes, but that
This-
business is an extension of you. Like it's
yeah. I think
you as a person can be multiple. The business needs to be one.
exactly. I also think that it depends on what your goals are. So I'm planning to hire, which means consultants will be. So I'm actually going to switch my branding soon from Koopal Consulting to, it's going to be Koopal Consulting, but it'll be KPL.
Okay.
Because I don't want anybody to come in, walk in as an employee and they feel a little bit weird because it's me and one other person and I'm Koopal and they're not Koopal, right? So this way, it's not so tightly attached to who I am as an individual. And I can have multiple business endeavors. But if you are looking to be an individual consultant or freelancing and that is what you want to do, that is a little bit more complicated because you are your business brand. It doesn't really give much wiggle room. And that advice would be different. I don't have much experience in that space, so I can't speak to it.
I think that makes sense, and it's nice that you've been able to identify that early on, right? And it's all adjustments, right? Same similar boat for myself and like revamping my current offer. I had to really figure out, hey, I got all these people. They want to do coaching, they want to do courses, they want to do in-person events. I'm like, it's all a part of the same ecosystem, yes, but does it make sense? And how do I make sure like I'm not the image, the face, the personal brand? Thankfully, I didn't start off with my name being in it, which is kind of good. But I feel like for people, if you're listening to this and you're just getting started, be okay with pivoting, be okay with adjusting as you're figuring things out. Nothing's wrong with that. And that's kind of a message I guess I'm hearing right now.
Yep, absolutely.
Awesome. Now, I love sales. Love sales. Funny enough, I won't say I never hated sales. I was always in the sales space, and I didn't realize I was in the sales space till someone told me I was in the sales space, and I was like, okay, cool. And I say that because like I was always communicating with people, and I felt like just kind of coaching them. So for me, coaching and sales are the same thing, and some people will say, hey, it's not. I'm like, you're having communication, you're guiding people. If you're servicing someone correctly, ultimately they're going to want to pay you regardless. And for me, I do a coaching kind of framework. Now, how important is making sure that the sales is optimized correctly in these businesses?
Extremely. I mean, you can boil it down to the beginning, right? Let's scale it back. If the sales aren't sailing, you don't have a business. I think that's one thing that upsets me the most because you especially see it in more marginalized communities where everybody's like, start a business, start a business, start a business. And you're putting these people in really precarious situations because they can exhaust their savings pretty quickly to have no outcome if they don't have a solid client acquisition strategy.
Got you. Yeah.
And
Mhm.
it's just so risky. So if you don't know how to sell and you aren't getting sales in place, you're going to struggle. So either partner with someone who knows how to do it or figure out how to overcome it. I don't like selling, but I have to. I reach out to people a day.
Oh,
Cold. I'm running multiple campaigns. I'm doing webinars. I'm doing podcasts. I'm
yeah,
networking. You have to sell. And even if when you scale, right, you can't plan for your business if you can't anticipate your revenue. And recurring revenue should only be a portion of it because you're not growing if you're not getting net new sales, whether that is, and it should be a combination to mitigate risk of new logo acquisition and expanded services from existing clients.
yeah. I remember hearing a saying, it's like if your business doesn't have sales, you don't have a business, you have a nonprofit.
Exactly.
And I was just like,
And
oh,
who don't need
okay.
to, and don't even want to.
I started laughing. I was like, that is very true. But it is true because it's basically like the bloodline. Like if you don't have blood in your body, you're basically dead. And that sales cash flow is important. Now, I have a question for you because some people argue like sales or marketing, right? Marketing can be sales, sales in a way, I guess is like marketing. Do you think they're one and the same or they're completely different things?
I think that they're extensions of one another, but they're totally different functions with totally
Hmm.
different skill sets. So marketing is top of the funnel. How do you attract? And sales is how do you?
Fair enough. Do you feel like you can sell without marketing?
Yes, I think so, but you're going to have to do a lot of prospecting.
Yeah.
And I personally prefer to have people who they may not be qualified sales, I have to qualify them in a call, but I'd rather have people that I know are interested in my services coming to me than me cold reaching out to someone. Because one person that's reaching out to me is going to lead to a phone call. I have to reach out to between 10 and 20. I don't remember what the industry statistic is in order to close one, right? So I think it's like 20 to 1 is what you close. And then if you have like 10 conversations, you're likely to close one. And then five, if you have 5 deals in the pipeline, one is likely to close. But a conversation does not equal pipeline.
Yeah. I tell people I'm like in relationships terms, would you rather, cold approach 10 people to try to go out on a date, or would you rather those 10 people come to you and then you're like picking and choosing who you want to go out on a date with? They're, they're like, oh, I was like, either one, you can still go out on a date. One just might be a little bit easier than not. But with that being said, on their sales optimization, what do you feel like is it typically more the data driven side that hinders a lot of people, or is it the people that they have on their sales side that's hindering them?
I would say it's the company feeling the people because you can train anybody to sell given they have enough aptitude and desire to learn. But if you don't have a process to train them on, they're going to fail. Now, if you are a 1 to 10 person company, you probably don't need a ton of data points to get some sales in, although the more data you have, the better. So I wouldn't say it's necessarily a data problem. But I would say it's a failing on the company if the people can't do it. And that's not their fault. But you have to figure out, what does your sales process look like? What does your customers' buying process look like?
I agree with you on that one.
And then
On both of them.
yeah, and then what different, actually, I'm just about to release like a little short form video on LinkedIn, which is 3 common sales mistakes, which is the big ones are misaligned sales and partner teams, selling futures instead of business impact. And then the third one is ignoring your buyer's buying process.
I think people definitely on that third one. I think the other two as well, but definitely that third one I feel is very underrated. It's like you don't even know their journey, like how they're going about potentially finding you, the conversations, like what they're are digesting and like going through the flow. I was like, have you even gone through your own flow and process for your company? They're like, no. I'm like, okay, well, that makes a lot more sense. Understood. Got it. Fair. And then they go through and they're like, yeah, this doesn't make sense. This doesn't make sense. I had trouble here. I was like, you probably should test run that before you decide to just fully launch it. But hey, to each their own. But I know this whole partner management and like developing these partnerships and having these ecosystems have become a bigger driving force for a lot of companies. How do you go about helping people really to like dive into those partnerships or build those partnerships? Because I feel like some people they feel hesitant because maybe they don't have the network or maybe they don't like know how to even provide the value, right, to them. How do you go about it? I have a
So I,
way, but
I look at it two different ways. Now, I'm going to tell you from the B2B perspective.
okay.
So that's not going to be how I partner with you or some of the other companies I partner with, but more so how does Salesforce or partner with the ISVs and SIs in their ecosystem, or how does that system integrator partner with the Salesforce? So, two ways to approach it. If you are a system implementation partner for a major company, the play is going to ultimately be how do I get their attention? Because you are one of tens of thousands and you are trying to teach and the reason it's important is because you get a pipeline funnel through that channel. So you're trying to teach a product seller, which you have to get through the gatekeepers for that, how and why they should sell services. And so you have to tell that story. So I always tell them, what do they care about? They're your customer too. You have to get in the mind of the person you're trying to partner with, right? So they care about how are you contributing to our bottom dollar or ACV contribution, which is annual contract value. How are you selling licenses? So you have to tell a story about one, how you've sold licenses in the past for them, and two, how you're going to sell licenses in the future. That's really what it's about. And I have a strategy on how to do that, but I don't want to give it all away or bore anybody. It's not relevant.
Oh no, hey, listen, if you're listening to this, you're interested, we're gonna have links for sure. I say that because I feel like again, a lot of people don't even look into the partnership kind of aspect or having it in the part of it. But maybe it's just the fact that they don't understand how to provide the value, how to even, you know,
Yeah. And
approach.
you have to figure out it's really it's about what matters to them and how do I do that? So how do I sell their licenses? Or if you are a product company developing an ecosystem of services partners, it is how will they sell more and get more revenue through selling for you? And it's just about telling that story. So first it's identifying which partners align best with where are you getting value, right? Which
Hmm.
ones will you get value from? And then it's telling that story of how they'll get value from you.
Like that, yeah. We had company that I was with, being their like head coach, we had a partnership with a guy, and honestly, it was like our major bloodline for like leads and archive. It was crazy. Like that one partnership and kind of collaboration. It was great. I know this is probably a little bit different in the sense of how you guys do or like how you're doing B2B partnerships, but regardless, if you're hearing this, look into it, learn about it. And if you're interested in it, she has the resources for it. Now, I want to dive a little bit over into the AI space. I'm very big into AI. I'm highly looking into it. As consulting is changing, I feel like AI is going to make it easier for consultants to grow and to build and to keep lean as possible, right? Where do you see the industry going as more AI tools, agents, these no code, become more available to people in this space?
Oh my God, I love this topic. I just did a webinar that I partner with called Swantide. So little plug in there.
There you
They
go.
automate Salesforce implementations. I
Mm,
do think that the future is going to be AI generated code. I think that you're going to see a quick upskilling of junior developers. And if they don't upskill, they won't have a job. I think when you talk about system administrators, they're going to become nearly obsolete unless they become administrators of these technologies that are automating these implementations. But I think it presents a really interesting opportunity. You see this across the board. Technology doesn't take away jobs from people. Yes, certain jobs will disappear. But if you are willing to upskill, cross skill, or adapt, then there will be a new job for you. It's just that the old job doesn't exist anymore. And a lot of these, I think it'll bring down the barrier to entry for a lot of things. So, what I see is developers becoming system architects and becoming really highly skilled developers across multiple technologies that can code check the systems and help dictate what code needs to be built. We're going to see not just the technical and solution architects increase, but also business architects to help translate what's needed, or at least break down what is needed from a business perspective for the technical or solution architect to translate that to the technology piece. Going to see system administrators get trained on these solutions, but I think you're going to see more functional consultants move into management roles, whether that's project management or client management or people management. And then you're going to see those managers drive business development activities and revenue driving activities. So when I did a breakdown on what profitability per consultant would look like with the introduction of this tool, this is a pretty conservative estimate. And I used industry standards. So I won't get into what those look like, but if anybody has any questions, reach out to me. I'll give you the math on how I did this. But per project, you're looking at probably a $35,000 profit per consultant per project right now. With the introduction of this tool, with them focusing on driving net new business and reduced hours and increased margins, that increases to over $100,000 per consultant per project. It's pretty powerful.
That's insane. That's it. So I'm gonna send you a message after this. You're right. I have a buddy of mine. He was the first guest on my podcast. He's very big into AI. He has his own software that he's developing as well. And one of the things that stood out to me, what he said was, AI isn't going to take over. AI isn't going to replace people. It's going to, what is it? AI isn't going to replace people. People who understand AI will replace those people. Basically.
Exactly. That's really it. It's AI will replace jobs. It can't replace people.
Yeah.
For people who are like small consultancies like you and me, I use AI my day to day. It is my most effective assistant. And that
Same.
is, my real life assistant, but also shout out to ChatGPT. They log deals in pipeline, emails, they help me craft content. I do give it very, very specific prompts. Don't get me wrong. And for anybody listening to this, when you see my articles, I don't want you to think I don't know what I'm talking about. I just can't pump out 2 a week and more when I'm running a campaign when I'm by myself. So I give it very, very like specific prompts, sometimes full outlines of what I want it to say. I just allow it to write it for me, and I'll tell them what examples for case studies that I want to use. And I actually did a lot of work on the front end of dumping in my emails and my previously written articles and some of my LinkedIn posts so it could learn my voice as well, because you can always tell when something is AI generated. And I wanted to eliminate that so people don't skip over it, because it is authentic to me. I'm just helping it craft a little bit more efficiently for my business. And you do have to fact check, because sometimes it'll just make things up.
I've been in that situation too. It prompted out, I saw it, I was like, this don't look right. I
Yeah.
took it down. I was like, okay, let's make sure we have a buffer.
They put a statistic that's uncited in there, or they talk about a story from some company and they don't cite the business name. I always ask it, where did you get this from? And they're like, oh, this is fictional. It's an example. I'm like, don't do that.
Yeah, no.
And it still
Unless,
does it. So you have to tell it again. Don't do that.
yes. That's like, if you can understand how to prompt these things correctly, I swear it's like more than half the work is already done. But I tell people, I'm like, there's no difference of you hiring like, a person. You're just hiring a tool, if that's the way you want to look at it, to help do the same thing. I'm like, big companies do it, so forth. Now, for yourself, because I know as you're still growing, you're in this, you're utilizing the tools. Where have you seen the biggest impact of AI within those like 3 pillars?
I think it's probably assessing your current knowledge. If you have a repository of information and you dump it into ChatGPT, it can tell you what your specialty is, or where you've leaned into certain things. So for me, it actually helped me create the training material for my methodology for new consultants. I
Same.
said, this is what I want. This is my focus. This is how I want to do this. This is what I care about. And I just spent time reiterating and refining it until I got what I wanted. And it took a couple hours, but it would have taken me a couple of weeks.
Yeah, I think that's so true. I like it because it's that backboard or slash whiteboard that you can have with yourself in a way.
Yeah.
And I'm like, this is great. I don't have to bother nobody. I can just like
Yeah.
figure this out quickly. But it's also, as you mentioned, it's like if there's resources that you have from other places, it can pull the data from there and think in that same way to have a conversation with you. As we start to wrap up, before we kind of, close things out, where can people find you? Where's the best? They're like, hey, I love what you're saying. I love what you're doing. I fit your criteria of what you're looking for. Where can they find you?
So I'm really active on LinkedIn. You can find
Yes,
my
you are.
yeah, very active on LinkedIn. Hey, when someone sees something enough, it becomes to them. So they're just gonna be like, oh wait, I think I need those services one day.
I like it.
Yeah, I reach out to 40 people. I get a bunch of accepts, very few responses, but hey, they're in there. They're going to see my content now. Lela Koopal on LinkedIn is my personal, where I post a lot of complimentary articles and posts and videos on tips and tricks for partnerships, go to market, and sales. And then my business page, you can just find Koopal Consulting. If you go to my personal page, you can also it's on my employment history. So you can look it up there.
I like it. Before we end out, as you're growing, where do you see over the next year to, I would say 3 years, right? I know you talked about rebranding, maybe, bringing down some people onto the company. Where do you see the future going in the short term and then long term, um, for Kapal?
Well, short term, I do have a pretty lofty revenue goal of 2.4 million for this year,
Here we
which
go.
I've broken it out to the amount of contracts that I need to win in order to get that, and it's doable. So I'm working on that. And I do plan to double every year, which I've tripled every year for clients. So it should be pretty doable for me. By 3 years, I would like to have a book of business in that 8 to 10 million range where I can start actually looking for acquisitions potentially. I want to get it to about a little over 10 million and then get a multiplier to be able to get a pretty good buyout and exit strategy.
I like that. Again, if you're hearing this and you're listening, let's make that happen.
Also, partner with venture capital and private equity firms that invest in the technology or technology services space to help make their investment profitable.
I like that. My whole thing is about insights. I love insights, and the company is called InfoProfits. So, what would be one piece of advice that you would like to leave with everyone that you feel could help change their trajectory for 2025?
It's a numbers game. So, for everybody out there that is starting a business or thinking about starting a business or even applying for jobs in this really difficult market, it is a numbers game. The average conversion rate from pipeline to close is, I think, 20%. So, you have to get I think this is the math. I'm not a math person, so don't quote me if I'm wrong. But I know that if you have 5 deals in your pipeline, you'll close one of them. So if you have 5 companies you're interviewing for, you're going to close one. Don't get upset if you're interviewing for 3 companies or you have 3 prospect calls and none of them close. You have to get that 5. And if you are missing that mark by a large amount, as far as you're having actual conversations with these people, then maybe readjust what you're doing. And you can call me if you want to bounce ideas off of things or reach out on LinkedIn to have a conversation. But keep that number up. It takes about 20 to get to that 5 number. So don't be discouraged. Just keep going. 89% of businesses fail in the first year. It's not because the owners are incompetent, it's because they don't keep going.
I have nothing else to add on to that. I appreciate you so much. Thank you. I look forward to the journey, and future conversations after this, because I'm definitely interested in some aspects. But thank you so much, Lela, for being on here. And for guys, please go check her out. A lot of great value, a lot of great insights, and a lot of great opportunities. So more to come.
Thank you so much, Shay.